The next part I want to talk about are operative clauses. Now, so the operative clause are the solutions in a resolution that are presented through like sort of a logical progression of sequentially numbered operative clauses. So you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down. Operative clauses are supposed to recommend, urge, condemn, encourage, request certain actions, or state an opinion regarding an existing situation. So we'll talk about different operative phrases. The key is that the reason we call them operative clauses is that basically you're putting something into operation. You're not just talking about whereas the preambulatory part of a resolution lays out sort of the rationale, the reasoning, the motivation, the moral sort of imperatives for taking action. The operative clauses are, and here's what we're going to do about it. So each operative clause calls for a specific action. The action can be vague, or the action can be very specific. You can have an action where all you're doing is going ahead and calling for negotiations, or calling for a specific. It can be specific, where you're calling for a ceasefire among different groups in a particular area for a certain amount of time. It can go ahead and call for a monetary commitment for a particular project. Here's the key, and you have to keep this in mind. The Security Council is the only body in the United Nations that can bind the actions of the international community. It's the only one that can require member states, to go ahead and take action. The General Assembly, the ECOSOC, and a number of other organizations, the predominant number of organizations where you're going to be working in, can only request or make recommendations, right? And this is key, that the scope, the power, and the authority of the committee is going to determine what's in the operative clause. If you recall, in the research binder, you're supposed to have a section in there that explains what your committee's mandate is, what your committee's power is. What are you allowed to do within the committee? What are you not allowed to do? Those limitations are going to shape what you can put in your operative clauses, right? That's going to shape. If you're not allowed to do certain things, don't put those in your operative clauses. Now, let me just tell you ahead of time, you're going to go ahead and you're going to run into delegates from other colleges who are going to go ahead and assume that their committee can do whatever it wants. They can't, right? And you can try and push up against that. If somebody proposes something that's well outside of your mandate, you can go ahead and try and very diplomatically say, you know what, actually, we don't have the power to go ahead and do that. A lot of times, if they can win the support of other delegates, you're just going to have to go along with it. But you want to try as much as you can, and always diplomatically, to go ahead and see if you can reformulate a proposal that's outside of the mandate of your committee, reformulate in such a way that it falls within the jurisdiction. The resolutions written in committee can only offer recommendations and should use operative clauses that are commensurate with the authority and their mandate. So what do I mean by that? So when you're going ahead and if you want member states to do something, you say recommends that we do this, or suggests that we do this. If you want member states to take a certain action, you can say urge member states to do this, right? That you have to always make sure that you don't go beyond your authority than what's permitted. If you want to make a really strong statement, right? Resolutions written by committees with greater authority can be more authoritative in their operative clauses. They can say the General Assembly condemns, or strongly condemns, or demands. Demands is really hard to do. You can do demands, but understand that when you demand something, people can just ignore, member states can ignore it. In terms of format and style, operative clauses begin with an active present tense verb, and they're followed by a semicolon at the end, right? So you're going to have these numbered operative clauses that go ahead and identify a specific action. Then when you get to the end of it, you're going to have a semicolon, and then you're going to go to the next operative clause, right? And then that's the format, and you should have a copy of a resolution by you, and you can go ahead and see what it looks like. There's some common operative clauses that begin with the following: affirms, approves, authorizes, condemns, congratulates. Right. So if you want to go ahead and if you want to note in your in your resolution that some steps have been taken already to go ahead and go ahead to address the problem, you can put congratulates member states for going ahead and advancing the cause of the empowerment of women through the adoption of this resolution or that resolution. What you have to understand and what you have to do is you have to make sure that the operative clauses go ahead and, again, as I said before, state and are limited to the scope of what your committee is permitted to do. Right? Again, in terms of format, each clause begins with a verb that I call an operative phrase and ends with a semicolon. And each operative clause should be preceded by a number. Now, if you have an operative clause that is going to go ahead and spell out an activity or an action that's going to be taken, and it's very complicated, then don't try and include it all in one sentence. What you want to do is you want to break it down sort of into bullet lists set off by letters or Roman numerals. So you'll just have to see the format to see what I'm talking about. But basically what you want to do is you want to break things down. So instead of making a general statement about what you're going to do, if you're going to go ahead and say, we'll go ahead and encourage the two parties to establish a ceasefire, go ahead and have some sub-operative clauses where in which you go ahead and specify where a meeting is going to take place to go ahead and work on the ceasefire. Another sub-operative clause that identifies who's going to have the authority to appoint people to the negotiation to negotiate with one another. You may even have a sub-operative clause that explains where the meeting is going to take place. That would be the idea. You want to break it down. The more specific that you get in your proposal, the better. You don't need to go into crazy detail. This delegate will be wearing this representative will be wearing a red tie and be on the left-hand side of the room. But you do want to break it down as much as you can. When you make proposals to go ahead and take action, one of the biggest mistakes that new members make is they don't deal with how things are going to be funded. So that's one of the things you have to look into when you're doing your research. You have to ask yourself, okay, I have this idea for going ahead and encouraging women, getting the private sector involved, or let's say hiring women to do a particular thing. Where's that money coming from? Explain it. And don't just the standard thing that delegates will do will be to go ahead and say, let's ask rich countries to donate the money. Try to avoid that kind of thing. That's like sort of the easy way out. By my way of thinking about it, the best approach is to figure out a funding mechanism that's going to go ahead and be self-sustaining. Oftentimes, I think it's a good idea to figure out ways to get the private sector involved in whatever proposals you want to make. The idea being that if you can go ahead and you can affect change by creating a program in which somebody's going to profit off of it. Somebody's got a vested interest in funding the program because ultimately they're going to get a return on their capital. That's a good way to do it. You can rely on the work of NGOs. There's some very well-known NGOs that do work, so you can encourage involvement with them. But think these things all the way through. Think these things carefully, and then talk to other people about it. Look at other resolutions and see how they have gone ahead and funded different things. Even if it's a topic unrelated to your topic, just look at the format they use and how they got things funded. It's important to go ahead and not to make sort of rookie mistakes. So it's a really fast version of operative clauses, but the only way to get good at this is to practice it. So when you're in the simulations and you're thinking about proposals that you want to go ahead and potentially implement, before you get to the conference, before you get to a simulation, think it out ahead of time. Think about what you want to do. And then not only think about what you want to do and how you want to get it done, but at the same time what you want to do is you want to translate that into operative forms. Right? You want to go ahead, and if you have an idea for how something should be funded, you have an idea of what mechanism you want to use to carry out a particular program, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. But at the same time, translate it into the language that you're going to need to be using once you get inside the committee. And there's nothing natural about writing operative clauses. There's nothing natural about writing perambulatory clauses. And that's why the only way to get good at this is to practice, practice, and practice a little bit more. But if you go to a conference and you're a delegate that's active in negotiations, you're speaking on a regular basis, you're busy handing around diplomatic notes and negotiating even when you're in formal debate, and you're an active member writing and participating in the writing of a resolution, you have a very good chance of winning an award. If you're somebody who sits back and does one thing, you speak really well, right? But you're not involved in the negotiations. You're involved in the negotiations, but you're not involved in the writing. You're going to do okay, but you're probably not going to be up for awards. You have to be firing on all cylinders, and that means you need to sort of practice all these things: the speaking part, the negotiating part, the dealing with different difficult delegates part, the resolution writing part. You need to practice all this stuff ahead of time and get good at it. And rely on the veterans on your team to go ahead and help you out. Go up to them and say, hey, I had this idea. Here's how I put it in. This was my preambulatory clause that justifies the action that I want to take. Here's the operative clause and the action I'm proposing. What do you think? Okay, so none of this is easy. It's very challenging. But if you practice at it, if you work at it, you can definitely get this done.